Okay, good afternoon. I am Assemblyman Michael Tanusis, representing the East Shore of Staten Island and Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I am the ranking Republican member of the Judiciary Committee, and today we are holding a press conference to address the memo sent by the New York State Department of Corrections Commissioner to his staff on March 31st, 2025. Very concerning memo. Basically addressing the staff shortage that we have in our facilities. Just to put things in context for everyone, back on December 30th, 2019, there were over 44,000 inmates in our state correctional facilities. After the criminal justice reforms, or so-called criminal justice reforms, that the legislature and the governor implemented, which took effect on January 1st, 2020, that number went from over 44,000 down to 32,000 inmates. A few months ago, or a few weeks ago, because of the laws passed by the legislature, such as the HALT Act and other laws, our corrections officers protested the conditions in these facilities. They walked out. It wasn't safe. We all saw the videos on social media of inmates attacking corrections officers and attacking each other. What happens after that? Instead of fixing the actual issue at hand, the governor decided that she was going to terminate over 2,000 correction officers, including those that were on medical leave, by the way. So what happens now? Now there's a staffing shortage. Now there's a memo that goes out to the jails. They are going to release, or try to release, people that are within 110 days of completing their sentences. Think about that. Think about that. Over a decade, I served as a prosecutor in New York City. I faced a multitude of different cases. Every single case I had, defendants faced a multitude of charges. A lot of times on those dockets were violent crimes and nonviolent crimes. And in the spirit of negotiation and plea bargaining, a lot of those defendants took pleas. A good amount of them to nonviolent crimes, because there was an understanding that they would do some sort of jail time, whatever that number was, which the defendant had agreed to. That doesn't even take into account the programs that we have in our correctional facilities, like the shock treatment programs, other residential programs, work programs. The fact that in New York State, when a defendant is sentenced, he actually does 6/7 of the time that he is sentenced to. Now take that and add the fact that now the DOC commissioner is using his powers to say, if you are within 110 days of the sentence you were to complete, now you are released back onto the street. I ask the public, I ask you, is the decrease in amount of inmates we have a result of a low number in crime? Laughable. Absolutely laughable. Any of my colleagues that take the subway in New York City, or walk the streets of Manhattan, or Brooklyn, or Queens, or the Bronx will tell you that violent crime is up. It is up. It is not because crime is down. It's because our state government, the legislature, and the governor continue to not hold criminals accountable for their actions. And by the way, this memo on Monday, this wasn't some type of pro-criminal agenda that was set forth. This was a direct result of our state government's incompetence. Instead of addressing the issue at hand and making the jail safer for the inmates and for the corrections officers, their answer is to release more people into the street so more corrections officers aren't needed. It is disgraceful, it is short-sighted, and the people need to know what is happening. With that being said, I want to introduce the senior member on the Assembly Corrections Committee, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano.
Thank you, Michael. Our correction system is in complete disarray and chaos. It's the worst I've ever seen. We know, Michael talked about the violence that's going on out in our communities, but there's violence going on in our correctional facilities. Since the passage of the HALT Act, inmate-on-staff assaults are up 76%. Inmate-on-inmate assaults are up 169%. And contraband seizures are up 32%. Last year, I remember the DOCS commissioner saying that we had to close prisons because we had a staffing crisis. Think about that for a minute. We have staffing crises in our hospitals and nursing homes. We don't ask to close those down, do we? What do? You give recruitment bonuses, you give retention bonuses, you treat your staff with respect, make sure they're in a safe and productive working environment. And this year, their answer is to release dangerous inmates early. And just to give you a few examples of some of these crimes that are going to be eligible. Operating as a major trafficker, sex trafficking, use of a child in a sexual performance, criminal sale of a firearm to a minor. That sounds dangerous and violent to me. This governor and our colleagues in the legislature continue to fail to realize that it's their policies that have created this staffing and safety crisis inside our correctional facilities and has jeopardized public safety in the streets. This directive is just the latest example of the incompetence and mismanagement of this administration and how completely out of touch they are, the governor and the legislature, under one-party control. The Democratic pro-criminal policies disguised as reform, but what they have done is created chaos, increased violence inside our correctional facilities, lowered morale, made it a dangerous and unsafe place to work, and has certainly undermined law enforcement. We see it undermine law enforcement out in our streets with their policies, and we see it inside our correctional facilities. From the prison closures, bail, discovery, raise the age, HALT, clean slate, less is more, an unchecked parole board, with no crime victim advocates or law enforcement on that parole board, by the way. And then earlier today, they passed the Fair and Timely Parole Act and elder parole, while at the same time, they held our legislation that would repeal the HALT Act and require drug dogs at every correctional facilities to keep people safe. As I said, these policies, their policies, have created this safety and staffing crisis inside our correctional facilities. They continue to ignore it by jeopardizing public safety. So Governor Hochul fired over 2,000 corrections officers. Now here's the visual. She literally locked the door on corrections officers trying to return to work. Some on family leave or workers' comp. Some missed by a few minutes, some went to a different shift. So she locked the door on our corrections officers, and now what is she doing? She's opening the door and letting convicted criminals out early, with no idea how many, when, will this be an ongoing process? Nothing. This governor is literally taking the handcuffs off criminals and putting it on our law enforcement. These dangerous policies continue to put the interests of dangerous criminals over the interests of public safety, crime victims and their family, and law enforcement. Again, shows how completely out of touch they are. This is unacceptable, wrong, and dangerous. It should not be happening. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce my colleague who serves on the Correction Committee with myself, Assemblyman A.J. Bepan.
So I didn't have the opportunity to read this memo until yesterday, and I truly thought it was an April Fool's joke. It's such a New York move to side with inmates and not our corrections officers. You know, this problem is going to continue to perpetuate in our corrections system until the governor and the legislature addresses the root cause. And that's looking after the workplace conditions that our corrections officers have to deal with each and every single day. 16-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts mandated, no work-life balance, no time to see your family, and when you're begging to leave, your job is threatened, your livelihood is put on the line. You know, I've been speaking with corrections officers since the end of the demonstration. I can tell you the conditions there are worse than ever. Their hours, their shifts are worse than ever, but now they're even more demoralized. This memo that was put out, we don't know if this is going to be the last of these memos to eradicate their prison population. I know that's the goal of many folks up here in this building. You know, 110 days is a starting point. What happens in a year from now when these conditions continue within our prisons, when workers are still leaving day after day, early retirements, leaving for local jobs because they can't handle the stress anymore, working for a state prison? Are they going to start releasing folks that have 200 days left, a year left? What's the stopping point? You know, my colleagues talked about this, especially Assemblyman Tanusis. This memo does not address the fact that just because she listed a couple crimes that are high-ranking A felonies it does not account for the fact that plea deals happen each and every single day. What's her excuse to the families that were impacted by these crimes? What's her excuse to the victims? This is not right. This memo is so short-sighted. I am proud to be with a conference that stands for common sense. I'm proud to be with these folks who stands with our corrections officers, and I hope that the governor and the commissioner backtracks on this memo and doubles down on the fact that we need real reform in our prisons, and that starts with backing our corrections officers. Thank you, everyone. That's right. Now to introduce my colleague from the North Country, Mr. Scott Gray.
Thank you very much. Thank you, AJ, and thank you to all of our colleagues here that stand for public safety, that stand for law and order in New York State. So let's just backtrack, because we seem to be focused on a lot of what the problems are, and that is the corrections department seems to be focused on the problems and not the solutions. So let us go back to the summer when we had hub hiring and we kept everybody within a close proximity of their homes, and that worked. We ended up with academies that were 2x, 3 times the size of what they have been. And then what did we do? We turned around and the corrections department put out a new memo that said 70 is the new 100% staffing. What did that do? That led to what we saw in the protests under workplace conditions, which is hours and safety. We work hard to make sure all of our employees have workplace safety. We work hard to make sure the New York State troopers have workplace safety with the move over law. We make sure that our DOT people are protected in work zone safety measures. But what happens when our corrections officers want workplace safety? We call them rogue. Nothing got fixed in this process. We have the same problems without any solutions. There's a letter right here from a local EMS provider in my area that is describing the inordinate amount of time that they're spending responding to the correction facilities in our area with overdoses and violent crimes going on inside these facilities. That is time away from the general public, and these people want some solutions. This was dated March 30th, right after these folks went back to work. So we haven't fixed anything with this situation. We continue to focus on the problem versus the solution. And now, what do we want to do? We want to purge the prisoners. We want to do a bed shed here and get everybody out in the street. There's solutions to this problem. You can bring back our corrections officers, put a 48-hour stay on their termination notice, give them an opportunity to walk back in that door, and then we can focus on things that matter to them, things that matter to the facilities and the integrity of these operations, and that is banning contraband. And then also, we can deal with the halt. We have, in so many cases, gone too far with legislation. Bail, discovery, we've gone too far in a direction and then had to make course corrections. The governor's right now talking about discovery, right? The same thing has happened with halt. It went too far in one direction and it needs a course correction. So my colleagues across the aisle, they like to say they have a seat at the table. You hear that when they run their campaigns. But I'm telling you right now, the seat at the table has no voice. These people are being tail whipped by the socialists on the other side of the aisle. And that is a problem. And until we focus on the solutions, we are going to have a system in crisis. And then one more thing I'll leave you with. So we have recidivism, and we have a way to prevent that. And this is not coming from the other side of the aisle. They're going to hand everybody a mask on the way out and say, here, this is a way we're to protect you so you'll never be identified in a crime and you'll never come back in these facilities. That's their idea of law and order. And I'm telling you, we need to fix our facilities. We need to fix them now. The solutions are right in front of us, and it's inept that we cannot arrive at some meaningful solutions to these problems. Thank you very much.
So with that being said, I'll open up to any questions.
Hi, Alex Gall from the Watertown Times. Sources who have been inside of the discussions regarding the budget have said that the governor recently raised a package of language relating to prisons, lowering the hiring age for COs to 18, expanding virtual court hearings, and expanding good behavior. But it's obviously there's nothing nailed down yet, but are you familiar with those? Does that sound like something that you would be opposed to or supportive of?
Well, just to be clear, we do have our ranking member of the Ways and Means here that could answer your question. But just to be clear, just to be clear, come down. Just to be clear, I just want to say this for the record, okay? This is part of the problem. This is part of the problem. She did not address the issue that the corrections officers raised. She fired over 2,000 corrections officers. Did these corrections officers not go to work because they're lazy? No, because they're scared. Because there's violence in these prisons. And she did nothing. Her response was to fire them. So unless we address the violence in the jails, to me it's all meaningless. So I'll give it to Ed Ross.
I'll just add one thing. We had a 2,200 correction officer shortage before all this happened. And then with the stroke of a pen, Governor Hochul fired 2,000 more. This staffing and safety crisis is a result of their policies, from the prison closures, from policies like HALT. Like I said, HALT, since its implementation 3 years ago, has increased inmate on staff assaults 76%, inmate on inmate assaults are up 169%. The governor used her executive authority to declare an emergency to ban the fired CEOs from working in local facilities. What the governor could have done, which would have sent a positive message to our corrections officers for safety, it might be difficult to pass the HALT Act. She could have declared an emergency and suspended the HALT Act, but she did not have the backbone to stand up to the progressives and socialists in the legislature to do so. She decided to stand up for those incarcerated versus our corrections officers who work a very dangerous job to keep us safe. So yes, you can allow for hiring outside the state, but last year, the DOCS commissioner said they were closing down prisons, as I said earlier, because we have a staffing crisis. How does that make any sense to anyone in this room? We have staffing crises in hospitals and nursing homes. We don't close them down. What do? You give them better pay, you give them benefits, you give them recruitment bonus, retention bonuses, pension benefits. Like the death gamble, which was the governor has vetoed twice, said should be in the budget, and it's not in the budget, and the one house didn't put it in the budget. Why? I mean, that would just protect the pension for our corrections officers who work a dangerous job to protect the pension for their loved ones if they decide to work beyond their 25-year retirement. There's a lot this governor could do. Like Scott said, we sent a letter asking the governor to reconsider these a 48-hour period to bring these people back, because there were some that got the door shut on them. They were a few minutes late. They went in for an afternoon shift. It would show that she heard, but this administration and the Democrats in the legislature fail to acknowledge it's their policies across the board that have created this staffing and safety crisis inside our correctional facilities. And when we visited our CEOs out in public, it wasn't about money, it was about safety and quality of life. And that's the things we should be working on to help support our CEOs if we want to do. The governor has options, but she's not addressing them. She'd rather have retribution. And in her budget, she put in for more prison closures. She didn't put in for the death gamble, she put in for more prison closure, which was strictly an act of retribution. It's unfortunate. That's not leadership. And she needs to be held accountable for that in the future.
Were you going to answer Mike? Did you want to speak to the budget negotiation?
I mean, I'll just say this. I mean, as Phil mentioned, we know what these are an attempt to come up with some, I guess, new ideas. You bring those individuals in, they're going to face the same dangerous working conditions that the COs are facing now. So it's again like this memo about releasing people. We're treating symptoms, we're not treating the disease. And you know, the solutions have been identified. Each and every year, many of my colleagues have been there with me when we've had the public protection budget hearing. And the union, NYSCOBA, has come before us and they've said, we need to address contraband, we need to address our staffing crisis, we need to address assaults and sexual assaults on our correction officers, we need to address HALT, the death gamble. They've identified those solutions, coming up with new ideas to address. We know what the solutions are. This is just an attempt, again, to treat the symptoms, not the disease that's plaguing our correction system.
Yes, I would like to ask about the Senate. I apologize, but is there a number of inmates that you're expecting to see released? Is there a certain figure that the administration has?
No, we don't have any numbers yet. Obviously, what we know is what has been reported and what the memo that was sent by the commissioner. So that number could be anywhere from hundreds to thousands, potentially, right? But the problem that we have is the response to it, instead of actually fixing the issue, which is the conditions in the jail.
And to follow up, you mentioned the governor's order, but it's also in the assembly plan, I believe, to close 5 dock facilities. What effect will that have, if that were to happen? What effect will that have on this situation?
It's going to be chaos, right? Chaos. I mean, we have to think about how we got to this situation to begin with. We got to this situation because of overcrowding, because of closures of other facilities, coupled with the laws passed by this legislature. So if you could only imagine what closing 5 more may potentially do at a time where crime is on the rise.
Can I just add something to that real quick? I just want to add to that, if I could, real quick. How does, the governor's got this big recruitment plan now, new recruitment plan. How does closing additional correctional facilities, what message does that say to people that we want to be corrections officers or stay being the corrections officers? I know people that were at Livingston Correctional Facility, they closed that down, they moved to Gowanda, the next year they closed down Gowanda, they relocated to Southport, the next year they closed down Southport, and so on and so on. How does closing down more correctional facilities help encourage the recruitment and retention of more CEOs when they're not addressing the problems of safety with the HALT Act? And the more prisons you close, you cram fewer and fewer inmates into less facilities, which doesn't lead for a very productive, safe environment.
Any other questions?
Do you think NYSCOBA is the best union to represent corrections officers right now, given the discontent that some of the corrections officers felt towards how the union approached the strike?
Listen, the union is comprised of these members that are corrections officers, okay? If there's any issue between the corrections officer and the union, that's between those two parties, and there's things that could be done in regards to that. But the fact of the matter is that the governor has not addressed the issue. We have not addressed the issue, whether it's with NYSCOBA or any other union. If the union is frustrated, there's a reason why the union is frustrated. There's an absolute reason why the union is frustrated. There's a reason why the corrections officers are frustrated. The issue has not been addressed, and that's the real issue here.
And a separate follow-up, do you think there are certain short-term solutions to address staffing shortages? Docs is saying that this is a way on the short term to alleviate and address staffing shortages.
The release of the inmates? The release of inmates is never a solution before their sentence time is complete. That is never the solution. Putting the public at risk because the state is incompetent is never the proper solution to a problem. That's the problem right there. It's the way they're thinking about it.
Are there shorter-term solutions that the GOP conference is interested in?
They have to put the corrections officers back to work. She fired over 2,000 corrections officers because they raised the issues that they were concerned with, and that was safety. You have to put those corrections officers back to work and then finally have a conversation as to how we're going to better the environment in the facilities. Any other questions?
Issue of early release. Obviously, people are saying these are folks that are nearing the end of their sentence anyway. Is it the concept that you have a problem with, or do you legitimately feel like, it's a public safety issue if these are folks who will be out in a few weeks anyway?
No, it's both, right? Because as I said when I spoke earlier, when you are sentenced in New York State, you complete 6/7 of whatever the judge sentenced you to. That's in addition to other programs that the state has in place, like shock treatment, for example, where you're allowed to come in and out of the jail, for example, or certain other programs that are within the facility. So what I'm telling you is that there's already things in place where inmates do not complete the full sentences. Now, the commissioner is using his powers to make that even less, correct? And I have a feeling that if this staffing issue continues, it's not going to end at 110 days, right? They're just going to keep adding and adding and adding, and then at the end of the day, we will continue to not hold criminals accountable for their actions. Any other questions?
So Commissioner Marticello says the HALT committee is meeting tomorrow. As far as I'm aware, that's not open to the public. Should any recommendations out of that committee be taken seriously if it's not happening in the light of day?
Once the governor fired the over 2,000 corrections officers, then that speaks volumes to the corrections officers themselves and to the general public. So we strongly, strongly advocate for the repeal of the HALT Act, because that is a big part of why we have so much violence in the jails. But once you fired those 2,000 corrections officers, the credibility with the union, with the officers, and with the public is gone. Any other questions?
Putting inmates from New York and other states, sending them across state lines?
If New York State is put in a situation where we have to send our inmates across state lines to other jails, then it would be a sad day for the state of New York. That means that at that point, the state of New York has lost the ability to protect itself and to service the public. And that will be a sad state of affairs if it happens. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.